If you've ever played Hell Let Loose, you probably know that learning how to actually play the game can be a little painful. You spawn in, you run towards the objective, you get shot by someone you never saw, you respawn, you run for another 5 minutes, then somebody starts yelling about supplies, garrisons, outposts, nodes, sectors, and you realize that knowing how to shoot a rifle is probably the least complicated part of this game. But Hell Let Loose Vietnam is trying something that I think could genuinely make the game better, and that's basic training. When I first loaded into the tutorial, I thought I pretty much knew what I was getting into. It's an FPS, and we've all done this before. Move over here, crouch underneath this, climb over that, shoot these targets, throw a grenade, and congratulations, you're ready for war. And to be fair, the Getting Started tutorial does teach you those basics. You learn movement, weapons, equipment, healing, and how to interact with the game. Useful stuff, especially if you've never played Hell Let Loose before. But I initially thought that that was it. Then I actually looked into the rest of basic training and realized, oh, they're actually trying to teach people how to play Hell Let Loose. And that's an important distinction, because there really are two different things you need to learn in a game like this. The first is how to physically control your character. How do I shoot? How do I heal? How do I use my equipment? How do I move around? That's what almost every other shooter tutorial teaches you. But then there's a second question. What am I actually supposed to be doing? And in Hell Let Loose, that question is much more important. You can still understand every button on your keyboard and have absolutely no clue why your team is losing. You can get 20 kills and still be doing less for the team than the guy who fired 3 shots but helped establish the spawn point everyone is now using. That's where the rest of boot camp starts to become interesting. Because instead of trying to cram everything into one giant tutorial, basic training is divided into 4 separate sections: training grounds, roles, units, and vehicles. Training grounds contains the getting started lesson we just covered, the fundamentals of actually controlling your character and interacting with the game. But after that, the training starts getting much more specialized. The roles section teaches you some of the jobs that make Hell Let Loose more complicated than a normal shooter. There's specialists in engineer training, covering roles where understanding your equipment and knowing when and where to use it can be just as important as actually shooting the enemy. Then there's grenadier and machine gunner training, letting you familiarize with weapons and roles that function very differently from your standard rifleman. And after that, the roles section moves into squad leader and commander, which I'm going to come back to in a few minutes because I think teaching players how to lead deserves a bit more attention on its own. Then there's the unit section, which contains dedicated lessons for recon and mortars. Recon is obviously a very different way of playing the game than simply joining a normal infantry squad. And mortars are exactly the kind of thing I would rather someone learn here than discovering for the first time in the middle of an actual match. You can figure out how the system works, getting comfortable using it, and make mistakes without your entire team wondering why the mortar rounds are landing absolutely nowhere near the enemy or on their own heads. And finally, there's vehicles, with separate tutorials for boats, armor, and helicopters. Again, these are mechanics where simply knowing how to play a first-person shooter doesn't really prepare you. Knowing to fire an M16 doesn't tell you how to operate a tank, and it definitely doesn't teach you how to fly a helicopter. And the tutorials aren't actually the only training tools available. There's also a practice range, which gives you somewhere to experiment on your own without having to follow a specific lesson. So if there's a weapon, piece of equipment, or mechanic you just want some extra time with, you can practice without pressure of a live match. And then there's the field manual, which gives you a reference to come back to when you inevitably forget how something works. And I really like that combination. The tutorials show you how the game's systems work. The practice range lets you experiment with them. The field manual gives you somewhere to look things up after. And taken together, basic training isn't just an obstacle course that teaches you the controls and then throws you into multiplayer. It's an entire collection of tools designed to help you understand the different roles, units, and vehicles. And not to mention the systems that actually make Hell Let Loose work. You obviously don't have to memorize every single thing before joining a server. You're still going to learn most of the game by actually playing it, but there's a massive difference between learning something through experience and entering a match without even knowing that a mechanic exists. Basic training at least gives you that foundation. And there's one additional thing about basic training that I think deserves some praise. The presentation is immaculate. These aren't just silent training areas with text boxes popping up on screen telling you what button to press. The tutorials are professional, with recorded dialogue walking you through what you're supposed to be doing and explaining the mechanics as you go.
Welcome to Commander Training. It is your job to lead your team to victory by organising squads, placing spawns, and using resources to control the battlefield.
And that makes a bigger difference than I expected. We all remember Call of Duty 2's training mission. You know, the one where the Russian officer tells you to throw a potato?
Why are we using potatoes instead of real grenade?
Because real grenades are valuable. In fact, they are worth a lot more than you are.
Oh, of course, Comrade Commissar, my mistake.
The extra effort gives the whole thing a much more polished, professional feel. Someone clearly put real effort into making this feel like an actual training program, rather than something that was added at the last minute because the game needed a tutorial. The narration gives the lesson some personality. It makes the instructions easier to follow, and, especially with the military setting, it actually fits the atmosphere of the game really well. It's a small detail, but it's one of those things that makes basic training feel like a proper feature instead of a checklist. And Vietnam makes this even more important because there are now systems that simply aren't intuitive if you've never used them before. Helicopters are probably the most obvious example. You really don't want someone's first experience learning how to fly to be after they've spawned into a helo full of other players. There's a time and place for experimentation. The helicopter full of my squad probably isn't it. And that's the advantage of having dedicated training. You can screw up, you can crash, you can press the wrong button, you can figure out what everything does, and nobody else has to spend the next several minutes dealing with the consequences. But the part I really like is what they've done with leadership. If you want to play squad leader and have never played before, you should probably complete the relevant training first. And I think it's an excellent idea. Because being a squad leader in Hell Let Loose doesn't mean you're just another rifleman. You aren't just a guy with a different gun and a little symbol over your head. You're responsible for other players. Your squad needs somewhere to spawn. They need direction. You're communicating with other squads. You're passing information up and down the chain of command. And you're helping connect a handful of individual players to whatever the team as a whole is trying to accomplish. A bad rifleman might get himself killed, but a bad squad leader who doesn't understand his job can make life harder for an entire squad. So asking someone to spend a few minutes learning the basics before taking that position, I don't think it's very unreasonable, and in fact, I'd like to see the training encouraged. And then there's Commander. This takes the same idea as Squad Lead and scales it up to the entire team. The Commander isn't supposed to be the best shooter on the server, but he needs to know what is happening across the battlefield. Where the squads are, where resources are needed, where the enemy is applying pressure, and where your own team is vulnerable. This way he can use his abilities or assets that can actually change that situation. In a 50 vs 50 match, one person taking the role without understanding any of those systems can affect the experience of 49 other players. So Vietnam doesn't just let a completely new player into his first match, click Commander, and discover the command system while everyone else waits. You have to complete the training. More importantly, to reach Commander, you're being pushed through the basic and squad leader material first. This creates something approaching an actual progression. Learn to be a soldier, learn to be a squad, and then learn to command the team. This makes sense. Because Hell Let Loose is fundamentally different from a lot of shooters, the guy with the fastest reaction time doesn't automatically decide the match. Strategy matters, positioning matters, communication matters, logistics matters, spawn placement matters. And most importantly, your ability to work with other people is integral. That's what makes this game so much fun when everything comes together. When your squad leader knows what he's doing, when people actually communicate, when someone gets supplies when they're needed, when another squad responds to a threat, or when Commander actually has people listening to him. Suddenly, what looked like complete chaos starts functioning like an actual team. But that also means the game asks more from new players than something where basic instruction is just see enemy, shoot enemy, don't die. And historically, that's one of the most intimidating things about Hell Let Loose. There's a lot going on. And while basic training can't eliminate the learning curve, it definitely helps. And if there's one thing to emphasize, teaching players the game is not the same as making the game easier. I don't want Hell Let Loose simplified into another generic shooter. I don't want all the mechanics removed because someone might find them confusing. The complexity is part of why I love this game. But if your game has interesting systems, you should actually teach people how the systems work. Basic training doesn't remove strategy. It teaches you enough strategy to participate. It doesn't remove communication. It explains why you need communication. And it doesn't lower the skill ceiling. It raises the floor. And that's a huge difference. Because ultimately, this isn't only for new players. Experienced players benefit from this too. Every squad leader who understands how to establish a spawn point is one less squad leader who needs the entire system explained during a firefight. Every pilot who practices before joining a live server is one less pilot immediately planted into a tree. Every commander who enters his first match with at least some understanding of his responsibilities has a better chance of giving the other 49 players a good game. Will boot camp magically produce perfect teammates? Absolutely not. People are still going to ignore their squad leader. People are still going to run directly towards gunfire. People are still going to take specialized roles they have no business playing. This is still an online multiplayer game, and we have to maintain realistic expectations. But even if the tutorials only make the average player a little more experienced, that's valuable in a game where individual decisions affect everyone around them. And that's why something as unexciting sounding as a tutorial might actually be one of my favorite additions to Hell Let Loose Vietnam. It's not a new map, not a new weapon, it's not a helicopter, and you're probably never going to see basic training in a trailer designed to sell you on how awesome the game is. But it is addressing something that a game this complicated desperately needs, teaching people how to participate in the thing that makes Hell Let Loose special in the first place, the team. Bootcamp isn't going to magically make you good at Hell Let Loose, but it might make sure that when you enter your first real battle, you at least understand what everyone is yelling about. And personally, I'll take every squad leader who knows how to place an outpost that I can get. So let me know what you think about basic training, especially if you're new to Hell Let Loose. Did it actually prepare you for the game? Or do you think it was kind of a waste of time? And if you're a veteran of Hell Let Loose, do you think requiring training for leadership roles is a good idea? Let me know. And thanks for watching. Take care.
Now, I hope you gentlemen like training, because me and the Sergeant Major, we love it.